Okay, thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is a video that's dedicated to the kind of special effects additions to scenes, which involves color box pigment inks, or just pigment inks in general, actually. I think I use the Hero Hues white pigment ink, some Dr. Martin's bleed proof white, and your standard gel pen types of touches within the scenes for additional details and textures. Going into the scenes and adding some pigment ink around the waterfalls really makes it look like, you know, kind of a misting, churning water, as does kind of some splatter brush techniques using the Dr. Martin's bleed proof white, as well as some gel pen specific highlights added to the scenes. I did go in and I added some additional imagery into the scene where I saw fit. I thought this area up here can be, I don't know, further made, further kind of interest, you know, visual interests employed in here with the use of some birds and wildlife into the scene, because we had room for it on this scene right here. Visual anchor points in terms of this deer up here, and again going into the the pigment ink applications down here, as well as kind of that splatter brush technique of, you know, in this case splashing water. Again, some subsurface imagery, which is the one that I used in here as well. And I don't know, I stamped in some extra foreground here and there just to, I don't know, just to further kind of enrich the overall textural statement within these pieces. Alright, so you can see those little splashes down here. There's kind of subtle additions, but I think on the overall they kind of add up to an overall kind of more, I don't know, a stronger statement in terms of scene lighting. You know, when you add that, you know, those layers of a kind of misty, thin layers of white pigment ink, it can really make like these areas look like they're glowing, and you're made aware of the space in between the objects when it's being illuminated. So I have some white pigment ink going on down there. That could be some mist, you know, from the waterfall, you know, kind of going behind these rocks in here. It can create kind of scene lighting, and that kind of subtle, real soft addition of mist like that is a nice textural change to kind of more crisp representations of light in the form of these little sparkles on the water, or splashes from you know, that falling water within that space. So very sharp little points of light, right, to the very kind of misty, subtle ones in the form of, you know, very thin layer of pigment ink. So fun stuff, all of it. This is the stuff that I really enjoy doing on my scenes. I really like getting down to kind of the details and utilizing these types of techniques. And they're simple techniques. You just have to kind of follow a couple basic rules as far as usage goes, and you'll be fine. But really fun stuff, and I think those extra little touches that can potentially put some scenes kind of over the top from just, you know, the stamping and coloring aspect of them, you know. And this one would involve kind of highlights and details. If you choose to watch the video, hope you enjoy it. And as always, thanks for tuning into the channel. If you have any questions, drop us a note in the comments section. Okay, the last video for this series here. A series of 5 waterfall compositions. We've gone through the compositional aspect of them, just kind of building the layouts, compositions, the foundations for these scenes. Then we've gone in through the toning process, just using some minimal colors, just a couple values of gray. We've established our lighting scheme in the scenes, and on the third installment we added color to these scenes and really gave it the you can achieve kind of an emotional statement definitely with just grayscale, but colors certainly can provide kind of that extra boost of kind of an emotional flair to the scenes and kind of gives it the character. It gives it colored lighting, which is what this really represents here. And now we're going to go into the special effects, but one of the things that I was thinking about too was I thought these scenes could really use a little bit of extra, I don't know, imagery, and kind of just in some subtle areas, like down here in the water. We have just this kind of blank area, and we're just going to do some, just really some minor additions to these pieces here, okay? So right in here, I think I can use a little bit of extra texture. So what I'll do is, with a color, out of the color scheme of this scene right here, let me see, I have my water pattern. Let me make sure that I don't have blue on there or something like that from a previous scene and impressions. Let me take this and, yeah, I think I had a little blue on there or something like that. But I'll go in with just this potter's clay, and it's this orangish, you know, hue. And let me try that out down there. I can see a little bit. It's just kind of a little subtle texture that I can add down there that will provide a little bit of extra, I don't know, richness, textural richness, okay? That's a little bit darker than what it will look like when it dries. All right? So, like I said, it's just something really subtle. I love playing different textures against one another. So, those are the little things that kind of are really fun to do. I mean, I have some textures in here using this, and I just did it with the black ink when we did our layouts here. But I've just clean this one off. I have a little cleaning pad right next to me. But what I'll do is I'll go in here and let's bring in some of those blue tones into the piece as well. I don't know if it'll show up. I've gone pretty dark with some of my tones that I chose, and Caribbean blue is one of them. I'll use some additional Caribbean blue in here. And the reason being is because a lot of times, well, most of the times, shadows are really defined by just being darker values and often brighter values of the color of that existing hue within a given space. So, like for example, I mean this pad right here, this orange right here is the same orange as here, you know, but, you know, when I have this in the shadow right here, this is just a darker value of this color, right? It's not gray or black or something like that in shade. And as is this white, you know, case up here, but right here, it's just a darker value of that white, right? So, it stands to reason that, you know, in a surface like this, if the surface is, you know, Caribbean blue or something of that sort, then the shadows of it will be just a darker Caribbean blue, all right? That's not to say that you can't do black for your shadows and things like that all the time, but I don't know, I would really encourage you to kind of incorporate the colors within that given scheme into the shadow definitions. All right, now this one right here, I think I'll just leave it nice and smooth. You know, you can add in like ripply textures or whatnot, but you can also leave it just as is, and it'll give you this nice glassy surface instead of something rippled. I think I like this one too, just as a really smooth, kind of serene type of texture. It could also represent something like a time exposure photograph, you know, when there's like churning water, or if you take a photo of the ocean, you know, and it's like a 30-second exposure, or I don't know, 15 seconds at least at nighttime or something like that. That's why everything kind of looks like all like steamy, you know, and misty on some kind of surfaces, you know, through the use of time exposure. That's it photographically, but maybe we'll just leave it as is right here. Okay, so, well, this one right here, trying to think if I want to add some texture in there. I'll just leave that one as is too. Okay, so one of the things I like to do too is I was looking at some areas down here, and I mean, this could be a fully realized piece right here, but I thought I would add in some extra imagery into it in the form of maybe some foreground. I think I'm going to add this deer into another scene. So we can still, you can still definitely add whatever you want to within your compositions at this point in time. I'm not sure how this is going to stamp out over the top of my alcohol inks that I, laid out down there. But I'll give it a shot. If it doesn't come out, it doesn't come out, or it doesn't have a, strong enough an impression. I don't know. All right, this is my Rocks in Water stamp. And I just thought maybe some extra texture in here might look interesting. Like that, okay. I'll push my perspective slightly with this. All right, now this stamped out darker than what it'll look like when it dries. All right, so right now it looks like it's in front of that tree, but it'll achieve the same value, and it should look just fine. This is a blue color scheme in here, so I just switched stamps. Here's my larger one of those. Yeah, let me go with the smaller one with that same stamp. This is Rocks in Water Small. And maybe I'll go with some smaller impressions over here, okay? But maybe what I'll do to make it look a little bit farther back in the distance, maybe I'll blot it first. And then I will go and I'll get a lighter version up here. And how about an even lighter version of here? Let's go for 3 impressions out of 1 inking. One impression was right here, but it's kind of using the second and third like that. So we have a little bit of these rocks like that. And then if you want to, you can kind of hit another impression or two, maybe with these. This could represent the rocks under the water. Okay, just very subtle kind of ghost impressions like that. So those rocks underneath there, so it looks like they're a little bit subsurface like that. And you can kind of play around with that. You can go for kind of deeper impressions of it. Let's just go for an inking. This is using the Caribbean blue, which are the colors that I streaked in there too. Use something like that. All right. So here's a stronger impression of that Caribbean blue. Here's a couple of the other impressions, and see they're kind of drying and they're lightening. And then when I spray this too, this tree right here will look much darker when I spray all of these. So, but you can see kind of that extra little texture down here in the water, like that. It gives it a little bit more surface and kind of depth, transparency. What you'd find in kind of watery scenes. If the water is reasonably clear. Let's do that down here too. I don't remember what blue that I used down here. I think I used a salvia blue, maybe? Okay, I didn't use the Caribbean blue down here. This one's much more of a kind of a muted color scheme. A little bit more pastel. Having a little bit of kind of these textures in here. Kind of reiterates the rocky terrain, in here that defines the waterfalls, but having those little textures down there, and again they'll dry and be a lot more subtle, but again creating that kind of subsurface effect of a transparent surface there. Okay, let's see. Let's go with this one right here. Let's go for a couple of these colors here. Let's go with the salvia. This is not formulaic. I'm just kind of guessing right here. And I know I used the Caribbean blue here, so we'll go with the Caribbean blue impression of this. This one is going to really be hardly noticeable, but especially when it dries. But so those kind of rocky pebbles down that way. And then when we look at it like this, it's not terribly noticeable, but again, it's in kind of those subtleties that, those are the type of details that someone looking at the scenes, might notice, for kind of a extra little bit of information and visual interest, okay? All right. Let's go back to that Rocks in Water large. Okay. And we have this whole area down in this scene, this half-page scene, and I thought we could use some additional textures down there. I'm not quite sure what color to do it in. Let's try the Caribbean blue. But maybe that's too strong. So what I'll do is I'll blot it first, like so. And we'll just come into it like this. Yeah, it's okay, I think. Something like that. So that kind of variation, it's a little bit darker over here, light over here. And again, all of that's going to look much lighter when that ink dries too. But when I spray it though, it'll bring it back to that depth, but all these other colors will be darker as well, so it'll be a lot more subtle. Okay, now one thing I was really thinking about with this scene here is the use of some kind of subject matter. So I thought this deer would be a great addition, kind of looking off the top of that what is it, a rim or whatever. And if I put this up here, it's going to kind of create the scale of this piece. It's saying that this waterfall is not going to be very large, okay? It's more of a subtle, you know, little pool, you know, it's not some plunging, you know, type of, you know, 40-foot fall or something of that sort. So adding something like a figure next to a given object, you know, within this given space will really tell the tale. Now if I put this deer this size down here on this near ledge, it would make this seem larger, but if I put it up here, it makes the whole scene, composition seem relatively small and maybe a little bit more intimate, which would probably maybe be, you know, very well suited for this type of kind of red rocky type of thing. Maybe it's, you know, somewhere out in the deserts, you know, where you're not going to have these gigantic plunging kind of falls. Now, what I was thinking about doing was blotting this off a little bit and not going with that real strong impression, and then what I'll do is I'll kind of blot off the bottom of this right here. Look about so I've really wiped off quite a bit down here. And I thought about putting that deer kind of in the mist. Let's see, let's put it right over here. I never know how much I'm taking out, and it really depends on how juicy your pads are and how much ink you stamped off with that first print right there. But see that? That's kind of fun. So it's just this little intimate pool, you know, maybe that's where the deer comes and gets a drink every night. Or something like that. Alright, I think I need some reeds or something like that in this piece right here. That would look cool, maybe. Maybe I'll add that later, though. I want to do some impressions on these pieces using some VersaFine black, so we have something really dark. Okay, and this one right here, these are some kind of like migrate, you know, birds in flight. And I thought doing this right across that moon would be fairly dramatic, if I want to do that or not. I think I do. You know, I don't know. This type of thing kind of adds kind of a visual focal point for the pieces. I can blot this off and kind of do it in a lighter tone, but I think I'll go fairly dark because this scene in general is fairly dark. So I want these birds to kind of really pop out and stand out against that darker background. If I did them a little bit lighter, they would seem farther back in the distance, but you can kind of play around with it. It's all really dependent on, you know, what colors you have going on in the background, if it can take it or not. Sometimes if you stamp it too light, like that moon might have looked like it was showing through, you know, a lighter version of these birds, so I went fairly dark, and I think that looks fairly dramatic. But I don't know. We are stamping it over the moon, but don't you think that kind of enhances the moon more than, you know, takes away from it, even though it is covering up? I think they play against each other. Having the darker figures next to that lighter moon makes the moon seem lighter by contrast, and it also gives it kind of depth in that given space. And on the overall, I think it provides kind of a nice focal point, you know? I don't know, there's a lot of focal points in these pieces when you talk about that falling water, because the falling water is really going to compete for the viewer's attention, which should be good, you know. That's a good thing, though, right? Because they should be something nice and dramatic, and it's something that the your viewer can kind of inspect further. Okay, let's see. All right, I wasn't thinking about this one, but let's go ahead and add this in. We can add in a little bit of a little bit more texture, foreground texture maybe, in the form of the winter brush. I'm tempted to do this one. I was thinking about doing it in the VersaFine, but I don't want to use VersaFine here because I have a lot of special effects that I'll be adding into this these pieces. Okay, just a little bit more texture and foreground. Something like this. Kind of provides a little bit more of a, I don't know, maybe a visual anchor of sorts. Something like that. Is that space down there? Maybe not in this piece. It's a little bit too far away. This represents something reasonably close to us. Now this right down here we have these leaves, but I don't know, I think just kind of adding an extra texture or two can kind of, it varies things a little bit, you know, just so that things aren't too, or monotonous at all, you know, if you do these types of things in here. Now, because this is kind of more of an intimate pool, let's use the same object here. When I say intimate, things are a little bit closer to us. It's not so kind of majestic and big, you know. It's quaint, you know. Let's add some of this right in here. Now I'm masking off my rock so I can put this brush right behind a rock or two, and by introducing this into this space, it'll give continuity between the foreground and background by having that same texture in there. And then we've kind of expanded on the you know, the possibilities of these waterfall designs having a different texture on them, so it kind of changes the spirit or extends the spirit of them a little bit. You know, I could be masking them off and putting a pine tree in here if it was more pine forested. So you can kind of do whatever you want on these. And on the waterfalls, I've provided kind of separations within those given spaces so that you can do those types of things. It could be palm trees or something like that in there, and you turn it into, you know, something more tropical. So anyways, see that kind of layering down there? There we go. And there it is right there. And it's in a couple spots up here. Okay, let's see. I mean, it could be any type of thing. These reeds would be okay too. But, I don't know, something like this maybe is a little bit more kind of ambiguous as far as what type of foliage it is. Yeah, it could be a much larger tree, but kind of, without its foliage. Okay. Down here. So it just kind of varies things a little bit. I probably wouldn't be doing this in so many spots. It's just that I have it out and I have all the scenes kind of ready to go, so kind of like an assembly line type of stamping process here. Okay. All right. I think that was it as far as some additional imagery. This is supposed to be kind of that special effect thing. I don't know. It's going in. This is like the embellishment video. And I guess images themselves can be embellishments. There are those kind of secondary types of elements that we can add in there or not. Okay, now let's move this video along a little bit. I can use, or I will be using, some gel pens. I don't know how much I'll use of those. Probably, I don't know. I usually get pretty detailed with that type of thing, but let's start off with, okay, I'm trying to think. I want to use some of the Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. And I want to use a gel pen and pigment ink. I'm trying to think of which one I want to go with first. Let's go with the pigment ink here. Sometimes I think maybe the pigment ink should go last, because if I try to do gel pen over pigment ink, sometimes the pigment ink rolls into the gel pen and it keeps clogging it. But let's go for some vast, sweeping kind of additions here. Okay. Now this will be a good video for those that might be curious about this process right here, but haven't tried it, or you've tried it once and you didn't kind of get the results you want. And I'll tell you, if it isn't 100%, it's really close to 100% of people that have a hard time with this do exactly the thing that everyone does, including myself, when you're doing this type of process. Whatever pad you have, I have this pad that's pretty new. I bought it about a year ago, Hero Hues. That pigment ink, or I have pigment ink pads, like color box ones, that are like 20 years old. And they are all absolutely loaded with ink. There's so much juicy ink in them. Alright, here's my 20-year-old pad right here. You can see it's actually kind of indented, where I've tapped into it. Alright, but everyone's pads are really, really juicy, okay? Unless you just happen to be embossing like crazy using the white pigment ink. But you get too much ink on your applicators, okay? Like this, okay? Just a couple taps like that. And I have very thick balls of paint like that, right? Like those 4 dots right there. The 5th dot is just as inky. What you need to do is just try not, I did that for, a reason. I tapped into it knowing that it would get really juicy just for the sake of showing you right here. But you really want to take off a lot of ink where it's much more of a dry brush type of effect, okay? And what happens is people might get the consistency of this right, and they say, okay, I got the right consistency. So what they do is they start bringing it into their pieces, and because it's such a dry brush type of touch, they can't see anything. So they hit it harder, and then they get a big blob because it squeezes more ink out. Thing is that you just want to be able to build it, okay? Let me zoom in much closer for this effect here. Let's do all of them. I'll start off with this one. I love churning water, and this mist that's created by my waterfalls, right? So on this impression right here, I kind of blotted off the bottom side of it, but see this right here? Let me see if I can get it lower here. See this, all this churning water right here, right? Where light meets dark next to it. That's why I've kind of left, you know, some of our waterfalls kind of light in the white of the page. So we can kind of create this white mist, and that creates that kind of motion for me. It tells me that water is getting churned up and, you know, turned into mist and whatnot. But see this right here? I can really tap down like this. I mean, you can't see anything with just a couple taps, right? But with repeated tapping like this, you get that kind of just a little bit of translucency up there that's happening, okay? See, maybe right up there, the waterfall's edge, maybe there's a little bit of, you know, water getting turned into mist up there. So it's kind of glowing around the edges now, right? And that is from the use of very thin layers and applications of that ink, okay? It's not only for waterfalls, it's, since these are waterfall scenes, it certainly works great for it, but see down here now? I can go for a thicker application of paint. I'll just go direct into this area because maybe I can use a lot of it down here at the base of the waterfall. I can't do too much like this, like a big slathering if it's really dark down here, but this scene right here is, it's fairly, I left it fairly light down there, so I can kind of just add that in like so. There's really too much of it right here. It's full globby looking, but I'll just wipe it off, okay, or I'll tap some of it off so that it's not such a thick saturation of it right there. Okay, I'll just take the other end of it and just kind of wipe it off a little bit. Alright, see that kind of frothy mist? It's like that right there. I love adding this around things like sky figures and light sources too, giving it that kind of soft glow, but this is one of those kind of terrestrial elements that you can really add this down, you know, into an area that really makes sense. I use it for fog and, like, you know, as if there were a fog machine or something like that in my scenes too, but mist and reflected light on the mist, perfect for a waterfall setting, so I really love doing this. Okay, now right in here you can see the edges of my boulders right here, right? Why not put a little bit of mist into this area as well, like some little kind of low-lying fog. Now see, it's barely visible, and that's what you want. If you add too much, just dab it off a little bit. I usually dab it off with my finger, like that, okay? You want it to where kind of the first couple tappings don't show anything. Then it's only through repeated tappings does it start to appear. As you get more confident, you can kind of go with a little bit of a wetter applicator, you know, juicier, you know, ink-loaded applicator. But kind of early on, just really control it. Now, if nothing's coming off, obviously you need to apply more ink. But by and large, you know, just go with a really dry application of this for the best effects and the easiest ones. Easiest doesn't mean fastest, but it's not something that's going to take a lot of time. So that passage of light through there. See, I've left it a little bit light in the background there too. Let's see that there's a little bit of kind of mist, you know, in the background in here. Just building it up slowly. It's where it's really almost invisible to the eye. With it just a, you know, a couple tappings, because so little is being applied, but only through repeated tappings does it show. Does it kind of reveal itself. Okay, like some of it down in my water. I do it where I've retained really some of that white of the paper, where it's really quite light. Okay. Alright. See this kind of distant area up there in that tree line? What I can do is I can kind of knock this back a little bit, and it looks like this area back in here is really far in the distance too. So instead of it all being black, some of it is black and some of it looks gray. The grayer areas are farther back in the distance. Okay, see that right in there? Okay. One down. 4 to go. Let me see. Put a little bit right in here. Let me break up that larger shadow a little bit. Yeah, look at that. Kind of isn't that kind of nicer right there? Have not, you know, so stark black right in there. Like so. Let's really put that mist in there. All right. The golden one. I've retained some white in here, but this one really needs it. It's just, there's just harsh transitions everywhere between, you know, that light and dark. So let's just start applying this right in here, everywhere, and kind of where light meets dark, right? That's where I start applying it, and I start it from the light areas, and I kind of taper it out into the darker areas. So now we have this kind of this mist building. This one hopefully it kind of looks real magical, you know, with that warm light in this scene. Now this one does represent, you know, a pretty distant area, a wide depth of, you know, scenic depth. It's probably going from something, I don't know what this would represent, something about, I don't know, 30 yards away from us, and this one right here is probably way back in the distance, about, you know, quarter mile, I don't know. Okay. This one I have this really slathered right now with a lot of ink, so because I have, you know, these big waterfall areas in the front, so I figured I'd use quite a bit of that ink, and by the time I tap it off a little bit, that's when I'll start using it in my darker areas. Apply more than you think you'll need, or more than you think looks good, because when the pigment ink dries, it'll dry darker than what it looks like when it's been freshly applied. And when you spray it, it kind of is like a pastels, chalk pastels, or chalks. You'll lose some of it, so it will get darker through that process as well. If you do end up spraying, which I really recommend, is to seal off your scenes. Okay, kind of hitting at the base of this, kind of the real kind of frothing, misting, churning water type of look down at the base here. This one might not be bad to use a little bit of yellow pigment ink as well. You know, this is supposed to be kind of golden light that's hitting in here. And maybe I will use some of that. But let's just go with white right now. Okay, kind of looks like that. This one looks a little weird. We'll use a little bit more color on that. Okay, so 2 down. This one's real similar right here, but we're just using a different color scheme. But it is lighter overall, though. Just in terms of the range of kind of tones in here from a contrast standpoint. The images themselves are fair, you know, they're dark because they were stamped in black, but as far as the coloring, we left it real kind of more, I don't know, kind of a pastel type of a softer look. Okay, starting in the lighter area. Like I said, I have a kind of a big slathering of ink on here, but you can't see it as much because I'm tapping it into a light area. But now I've tapped it off a bit. Let's move into where light meets dark and move into those darker areas. So this rock right here, oh, it really stands out. Let's put a little bit of that mist kind of encroaching in it, enveloping it. And then, of course, where mist is around, if we have light kind of reflecting off of it, that's when you see it, like so. Same thing with this rock right here. Now we have some trees in the distance, right? Let's put them in some, kind of envelop them in some fog and moisture. One of the more distant ones that are still in the light, kind of added in there and vary it. See this little one right here? These little trees right here, I'll put a little bit over the top of them, and don't they look a little farther back now than the taller one? See that? Kind of just putting some in some mist. Hopefully the object's a little bit more varied and interesting, and also kind of more incorporated into the the piece through the process of kind of a universal texture in the form of this kind of soft application of media. All right. Okay, that looks good for that one. 3 to, oh, we have our big ones, you know, ready to go here now. For me, the bigger the better when it comes to this effect, because I really have fun doing it. Okay, look at this. It's this wing of that bird, like that. It's like you can put some of that moonlight on the wings of the birds, like that. Okay, that moon, around that moon where light meets dark, just try to make it glow a little bit with a little use of some pigment ink on there around the perimeter. Where this cloud is, I'll try to soften up that a little bit. Make it look more like vapor, you know, which a cloud is. It's that moisture kind of in the air, and it's being illuminated. Okay. So isn't it, I don't know, to me it looks like it's glowing a little bit more. Okay, let's follow down here, right at the base of the waterfall, right? Kind of where that water's really churning up. There's millions of gallons of water. Okay, look at that. See, here's the difference between these two. It's a little bit more diffused. See that kind of area down below where it's hitting? This is more crisp right now, so it's... I mean, one's smaller and one's larger than the other, but... Alright, now this one I've made a little bit dark down here, so we'll see how this looks. I have a lot of area to fill in here, so... Let's see if I can kind of get that going. Okay, let's see here. I could use a little bit more right up here, I think, at the base of this one. It might have looked a little bit lighter, but as it dries, it really darkens pretty quickly, so it becomes more and more transparent. So you kind of have to build it up a little bit. You might have to keep building it up. It might kind of, some of it might disappear too much, then you just kind of build up over the top of that and just kind of keep building it, towards opacity. It's never going to be opaque, but you can kind of keep moving it in that direction generally. Okay, now we have these images down here. Hopefully they're not too wet, but I can just kind of bring some of that mist down into these areas, like so. It's kind of mist, but it's also lighting because it represents illuminated, moisture. Okay, so this area right around here, those rocks, I put a little bit of lighting on that, maybe. Alright, I need to switch sides. My tip has kind of become too smashed, and I'm kind of getting some of the cardboard. Alright, the moon needs a little bit more again. Okay, I think that looks good. As far as the amount goes, let's take a look here. Hopefully it looks nice and kind of atmospheric. Alright, let's try this against my 8.5 by, let me see, what is this? 8.5 by 5.5 piece. Alright, right where splashing water meets kind of the darker area, where light meets dark. We have our deer in the mist. Let's just reiterate that with some additional mist, okay, like this. I could put it really wherever I want to, very specifically. Start in the light and work into your darkness. Where you move into the darkness, use less tapping pressure until you kind of get the feel of how much ink is on your applicator. It's really hard to tell how much ink is on your applicator when you're going light, or white into light, in a lit area. Kind of see all these areas around, all the objects around that churning water is, I kind of diffuse them a little bit by making them a little bit lighter. Seeing that there's a lot more kind of moisture in the air, like right in there to get illuminated. Alright, let's take a look and see what we have here. That kind of deer that's really enveloped in mist up there, but I also put it on some of those leaves, right? Don't those leaves look a little bit more dimensional with some of that on there? I don't put it up here because it's dark against dark, but where it's light against dark, I can just kind of put a little bit of that down. Don't do it on all of it, because now it looks more dimensional that way with depth. See, kind of around the where light meets dark, meaning where falls meet rock, in this case, there's an extra little touch of depth and texture. Okay. Right here, right around that moon, see how that moon's kind of diffused? You have that kind of mist kind of coming out here into the rocks where falls meet rocks. A little bit of diffusion along right here. Okay. Alright. Right in here, you can see all that mist kind of developing around in here. Like so. That area right up in here, right around the sides of the falls especially. in this area, a little down here, make it a little bit more white, textured. See, it's really given, this one's one of my first ones, so it's really given the pigment ink a chance to dry quite a bit, so it's quite a bit darker. Okay, looks like, sounds like the kids are forming some sort of a battle coalition outside my office door, so I might pause right here. But now this one, I didn't really mind that getting a little bit more diffused, because that really stands out against that dark area. So, all right, I'm back. What I've done just now is I've kind of reconstituted my bleed-proof white, Dr. Martens. Bleed-proof white is a very opaque watercolor, and what I do is I just squirt some water in there and stir it in there to get the consistency I want. I kind of liken it to, not quite syrup, but maybe a very cheap syrup where it's really quite watery. But I kind of get that consistency with that for the purpose that I'm using it with. Someone like a calligrapher that uses it is probably going with a much thicker version of it, so that it's a little bit more opaque over like a black paper or whatever they're writing on. But it's a really fantastic medium for different types of applications. Okay, I use it quite minimally in terms of how I use it, but I use it for kind of a splatter painting type of effect using an old toothbrush. Okay, now just when I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I don't get too much in here where it's going to leave a big blob, which sometimes happens. If you're doing it on glossy cardstock, you can kind of just wipe off anything that you don't want, because this really kind of dries very quickly and it sits on the surface of the paper as opposed to getting absorbed into it. But here's my splatter, and see, that's just kind of a little bit right there. Let me try to get the consistency I want. Something like so. Alright. Sometimes when I start doing this, like at the demo table at conventions, everyone backs up, I'm thinking, it's not going to, like splatter 5 feet out or something like that, or even 3 feet out, but it's kind of, I don't know, you kind of have to get kind of familiar. You just don't want to do it like that, where it's going out that way, but you kind of have to figure out which direction it's going to go in, depending on your applicator. Now this, I don't know if it's really going to show up on this one very much. It's really not for so distant kind of waterfalls, but I do like the texture, so I think I'll throw some of it down here. Alright. There's a little bit that you can kind of see on the perimeter here. Maybe. There's a little bit of a blob there, but I don't know. I can kind of take that out of there. Okay. Where this will really show up is it's kind of my larger pieces, or my closer pieces, okay? Where, the splashes would be much more present. Okay. See, I'm kind of aiming it roughly down at the base of that. I can do this with gel pens too. I can get that kind of splashing action, but this one really gives me a variety of a varied kind of dot pattern and a little bit more random. Okay, let's try to get it right in here. Let me change the exposure here. It's a little bit too light. Okay, here we go. It looks like it's coming in this way, right here. Okay, let's take a look at that. That was pretty effective, I believe. See those little tiny splashes kind of coming around here. Out here. See that where there's little dots in the darker areas? Right down here. Let's take a look at the overall. That. See there's some down here too that I applied. Right in here. I mean, we might bolster this with some, gel pen specifics. But we'll start off with that. Okay, well now we have a really large fall here. I think I need more ink on my, there's still some on there. That's still, or paint that's still on there. I mean, this represents a waterfall that's quite a distance from us as a viewer, but where you wouldn't see these little splashes like that. But I think it's a good texture to use down there. See that right there? Okay, and I'll do some on this side now. To me, I don't know, it kind of makes it makes it a little bit more dynamic. There's a kind of this splatter definitely has kind of a, I don't know, there's a motion to it. I mean, I don't have like these drag streaks, like they're like shooting stars around there, but there is kind of this immediacy to that, that splatter. And, yeah, just let me throw some of this texture over the whole thing too, maybe. I don't know, there's just a little bit more of a dynamic feeling to it. It looks kind of crazy up close like that, doesn't it? But, when you pull out, I mean, you can't really see it at all. It's one of those more kind of detail-oriented touches. Definitely visible, but not quite so strikingly apparent when viewed at standard arm's length. Okay, let me get a little more ink on this, and every time I re-ink it, I want to reapply just so I can get a feel of what's coming out of there. If I have more paint, then it's kind of thicker little splatters come off, so I want to know what I'm getting myself into and which direction which direction I should kind of aim this. I'm going to go with a shorter stroke on the splatter too for different touches. I don't know, I have to kind of relearn this every time I do it. Maybe the brush gets a little bit more soft or brittle. I don't know. My consistency of the paint is a little bit different every time. I mean, it's not
you know, like completely relearning something from scratch, but I don't know, it's a little bit different every time, because I don't just, you know, and it's also because I don't do it very often. Oh, this works great for stars, too. This one's so light, I can't, it's hard to even tell if something's coming off of it. Or if anything's coming off of it. Alright, kind of a little more subtle, because this is white against light. Okay, but it shows up down there for sure, right? Look how dynamic that can look. And if you look real close, if I can show it real close, see it's down there. A little bit around up there. A little splashing up. Side, let me try to add a little bit more there. Something like that. Alright, let's take a look and see what it looks like on this golden one here. Oh yeah, I was thinking about adding some yellow pigment. I don't think I'm going to do that. This will look great with some gold highlights, though. Sorry, my hand's covering up, but this one's one of those things where I have to really be at a very specific directional angle for the application here. Okay, let's take a look at this one. I think that one really improved this one. Kind of having that overall texture kind of throughout. I really splashed it everywhere. Look at that kind of motion. This one have it in front of the trees. Down there in that textured water. All right. Okay, so that is that. We'll keep it. We'll keep my camera down low here, and we'll go in for some really specific applications of kind of detailed touches in here in the form of some gel pen work, and I don't know if we'll use any more markers, but look at those splashes down there. Isn't that kind of dynamic, though? Alright. Yeah, maybe I'll zoom out a touch. Okay, so a little bit more subtle. Unless you look up close, and it's really quite dynamic. That's one of those things I really like. It's kind of something that's subtle and not necessarily as apparent, but then, you know, upon closer inspection, you know, people can kind of see that texture down there and the, you know, the richness of that, of those forms down there. All right, I have ink all over, paint all over my hands now from that. It's probably all over the. Actually, I should change my paper underneath here, because this paper underneath is really going to be textured, and it's not that bad actually. Just fold it over like that. try to use my blotter paper as much as I can. Boy, I just picked that one up right there, and it's really textured. That paint really sits on the surface of the paper, so it leaves you these little beads of kind of raised paint. It doesn't really penetrate the surface, so, and it dries very quickly. That chalk, you know, that they use in there. So that if you don't like some of it, or if you get too much, or if there's a big blob of it, even after it dries, you can kind of buff it right out, and it comes right off. So that's where kind of spray sealing will affix it to your scene a little bit more, should you want to do that. But anyways, I need to wash off my hand. Okay, what we have are a bunch of gel pens. I have the Uniball Signo brand. It's 0.7 millimeter, and here's a Uniball kind of pastel yellow. And then I have my Signo, not Signo, but my Shuttle Art gel pens here. These ones are a little bit more watery, so they're a little bit more translucent, so if you want a subtle detail that doesn't stand out as much as the more opaque style of Uniball, higher quality ones, these ones are the way to go. These ones right here are great. They're like 10 cents a pen, I think. I calculated a while back when I bought them. Very inexpensive. Okay, so let's try to apply some effective highlights and textures into our scenes. Okay, so for something like, I'll use that for something else. For something like this, all right, sometimes we want to create a little bit of separation and to give a little bit of extra texture in some areas. Okay, let me see. Here again. Alright, now the top sides of some rocks that we've retained the lightness of the area, what I can do is I can kind of come into those areas, and the exact opposite of adding in a highlight, I can add in opposite of a shadow. I can add in a highlight on the top sides of things where we'd be using darker colors on the bottom sides of things, right? You know, typically for shadows, unless something's, you know, being bottom lit or something like that. But just adding those little highlights like that can kind of reinforce the lighting direction of a given object. Alright. Something like that. Now you have to kind of keep things consistent. If you add a couple of them where other things are not lit the same, it doesn't make sense. So we kind of have to do that in different areas, okay? So you see it right up there. There's none down here, but we can illuminate some of those objects down here as well. And again, this is a blue color scheme, so I'm doing a, kind of a blue highlight. We can also use white, because there's white and blue in the scene. So we're saying that there's white and blue light throughout the scene. And see, sometimes I want to add some of these highlights in the darker areas, and that's where having a color rather than white is more effective, because it just doesn't stand out as much. You want it kind of subtle. Okay, so let's take a look and see what I'm kind of doing here. All right, so there's some little highlights here and there. Sometimes it's just like 2 or 3 dots. Right on the top of this one, it's, I don't know, 6 dots. There's 3 little dots right here. Got a handful of them right here, right in there. See, it's on the top edge. There's a couple right there. So, it's really subtle. I have this camera kind of zoomed in pretty close right here, but it's still very subtle in there. It's only upon kind of further inspection, closer inspection, do we see those kind of a little bit more of that differentiation up there. Okay, but see down here in these splashing waters, I can add, a colored dot like this as well, so we don't just have like white, we have blue kind of splashing water. And you can add as many as you want, or as few as you want. It just kind of gives a little bit of variation. Okay, so down here in my kind of foreground areas, if I want to, I can add little touches down here. It's kind of like little sparkly reflections on the water surface if I put it into a darker area than the color itself. Sometimes if I put it in white, it's going to be a darker dot, right? Alright, that was the blue. Let's try it with white. Let's go with the more translucent white in the Shuttle art pen. It still stands out pretty good. It's going to dry darker than what it looks like, though. Isn't that kind of giving it a nice surface texture, having those little highlights on there? It looks a little bit deeper and dimensional. Gives it more of a surface now. We have that color that's been applied. It's now underneath something else where it was the top layer before, but now visually I think it's, you know, kind of the secondary layer. Okay, here's what it looks like. Alright, and yeah, more splashes down here at the base of the waterfall, if I want to. I need to be careful because doing this can kind of remove some of the pigment ink that's been applied too, so I don't know, you can always spray seal this and then go over it with the gel pen, that works too. But see this right over here, where it was really hard to get a splash that I really wanted, but I can kind of just hit it with, you know, very targeted dots right in here, like so, for that splash that I want. Okay, like right around here. So it's kind of, I mean, it's really subtle, but just that kind of transition, it makes more of an impact, you know, saying that water is hitting there, and you kind of have this kind of explosive type of patterning, dot patterning, light patterning, whatever, kind of coming out from there, emanating from that location of impact. Tapering a little bit. Let me move to that Signo pen where it's a little bit brighter or lighter of a dot. Okay, so tapering it a few more around the light area, and then as I move out here, I'll space the dot out. I'll spread it out a little bit more so it looks like it's emanating and dissipating out there, you know, farther away from it. Okay.
See, this otherwise had those streaks down here before, but now adding those rocks like that, this little branch, I mean, doesn't it make for kind of a nice little area down there? A nice little crystalline pool with reflected light. Okay. Right in here. Okay, the water surface down here. Call this specular light. It's light that's brighter than white in photography, and it's like having those little glimmers of light, reflective light, you know, reflecting back at the our camera if we were doing photography. But see that little light on the water surface? It gives your water extra depth, and that's where kind of doing those, you know, subsurface rocks comes into play too. I can put a little dot on top of it, so it pushes that rock image down below the surface. Okay. All right, let's take a look in here. I went pretty crazy with that Dr. Martens on this piece right here because it represented, these waterfalls are supposed to be fairly close to us, so I figured we can have a little bit more of that splashing texture where it kind of doesn't look weird if I use too much of it. Here's some water down here too. We can kind of give it a little bit more of a reflective quality, having that specular light in there. Someone once, I submitted a kind of a write-up or something, and I was talking about lighting and water and specular light, and they, some editor corrected it, and they changed it to spectacular light, which is not, you know, what I was referring to. Although it can look spectacular, but not really. It's just kind of more kind of subtle. But I don't know, I guess they didn't know what specular light was. Okay, so adding some of this on my rocks. This is the tan Shuttle art. And like on the top sides of my rocks, see this, it kind of blends in the tan with the tan, you know, the reddish, rusty looking rocks in here, rather than going with white. It's kind of nice having that set. And like I said, that this set of Shuttle art pens was, I don't know, it's like, it goes between $25 and about $30 for a set of 180 colors with 180 refills, so it's really not too bad. And they work, you know, they work pretty good. Okay, see that right there? So there's some kind of textures there. So it kind of reinforces the lighting, you know, being top lit. Top lit, not topless. Okay, and I'm hitting this kind of in the lighter areas of the piece. Otherwise this would, you know, this highlight would stand out too much, I think. So this is kind of giving a little bit of extra texture to my rocks as well as representing lighting. Okay. So there we have that. those textures in there. Let me do something right here. See these leaves up top where I've varied them. Let's put a couple highlights on, you know, a couple of them. See how they look. Give these some of these a little bit of extra lighting for dimension. It'll give these leaves kind of a subtle element, you know, within the scene, something in common with the rest of the scene in terms of having universal texture. Okay, so there's those highlights in there. Here we go. I don't know if you can see them. They're on some of those leaves right in there. See that right in there, there. So overall, arm's distance, you probably can't see them, but upon closer inspection, and I think it does read on the as far as the overall kind of lighting scheme of the piece. All right, let's take a look here. A little bit of highlighting on the tops of some of these rocks. A little bit of a surface shimmer. I kept it, you know, it's a little bit too dark. So you can kind of just blot them out if you don't like them. A little bit more reflective. Okay. All right, let's take a look at this one right here. This one is pretty crazy with that gold and light color scheme. Let me add something up here. I'll put a little bit of a couple little stars up in the sky. That. Twinkle, twinkle. Okay, and let's take a look at this piece. This piece is really subtle, so I don't
you know, I don't think I need very much in here. More of a kind of a diffused lighting scheme in here. Kind of more pastel based. Maybe do like a little star, first star of the night type of thing. For, I don't know, a couple stars maybe. Okay. Okay, let's take a look at the overall kind of subtle details here and there. Some of them are much more obvious and apparent. I didn't use the yellow one here, but I don't know. It kind of goes along with that color scheme. You can kind of add some of those in and whatnot. But gold would look fantastic, or any of the metallics, the bronzes and whatnot. Okay, let's take a look here. Let's see what we have. Okay, some additional imagery, of course, in the forms of things that are going on in the water, some rocks and textures and whatnot. Subsurface rocks, images stamped off before we've gone in and made those imprints within those spaces. Kind of, you know, visual focal points in here. And, you know, those are the big changes, but kind of the more subtle ones are where you've kind of added that glowing kind of haze around certain objects, splatter painting, and gel pen kind of dots, highlights, whatnot. I really need to spray seal these, and I was trying to determine if I should do that now or later. I guess since we're on this grouping right here, I might as well spray them right now and include it in this video, because that is kind of part of the whole process of scene embellishment here. So, all right, probably give me 15 minutes. Okay, 5 freshly sprayed scenes. These are still tacky because I didn't wait for them to dry at all, but we can see the depth and saturation that spray sealant provides. I'm using the Krylon UV resistant clear, and I don't know, it looks pretty good. Of course, this is stamped on glossy paper to begin with, but the glossy spray kind of makes things a little bit more uniform, and definitely the colors are that much more saturated and deep. We can see our kind of textures from our watercolor pens. I mean, not watercolor pens, the alcohol pens. And we can see some of those, you know, subsurface rocks down below there. But the there's some things that kind of disappear, but the Dr. Martin's bleed proof white is definitely very crisp and clear still. Sometimes if you spray things and you give it, you know, a really heavy spray, things like the gel pen dot, the gel pen dots will kind of disappear a little bit, and as does some of our pigment ink applications. So what I did was I kind of sprayed a little bit more perimeter oriented without getting into the center part as much as the perimeter, so that I would retain some of that more subtle kind of misty type of touch in there. But look at those deep saturations of color there, like that. You know, it's really kind of a nice finish on there to kind of coat your pieces and whatnot. You see that right there? Look at that
depth of that water down there too. You have the surface objects, and then we have the water pattern small texture in here in multiple values. It's in blacks, grays, and in also stamped in color, and then with those same colors blended over the top there. Okay, we still have that misty type of action going on around in here. A little bit more in the foreground, but we do have it over the tops of some trees, kind of pushing the trees back somewhat in terms of depth. And there we have it. Some waterfall pieces here. I know I should have known that I would want to try to get the glare off of some of these right here. I should have known that I would, doing a stamp sketch video would make me want to finish all of these off, but anyways, here they are. Now, I just purposely, if I were doing each one of these just individually, I don't know if I would have, came up with these color schemes right here. But I did want to keep them somewhat, make them different from each other so that we can take a look at some possibilities as far as color schemes go. And I mean, this is just touching on it, and you can do all kinds of other color schemes. If any type of color scheme goes, you can make, a purple scene if you wanted to, or whatnot. This one's kind of violet, and I don't know, kind of more pastels, and you have the deeper, full range of values here in this nighttime scene, and I don't know what time of day this one is. Could be kind of more of a seasonal type of thing where you have, kind of a lot of fog and mist coming into the surrounding area. But I don't know, all of them are really fun. I really enjoyed working on each one of these in terms of playing around with color schemes and whatnot, and definitely as far as kind of the exploration of what the waterfall stamp compositions could be configured as, and as far as their usage goes. I was thinking about this one right here, and about, I always have kind of the larger version, if used with the smaller version, lower and therefore closer to us, but I thought one of these days I should do the larger version in the background and maybe have a couple smaller kind of twin falls or something like that in the foreground. I don't know. I'll play around with something like that in the future, but anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it came in handy for you if you are looking to kind of employ some of these techniques as far as adding some subtle details. It could be a bold, from the bold to subtle details in your pieces for kind of an extra kind of textural level that you can achieve by utilizing these types of mediums in your scenes, okay? And with maybe some new types of materials, like such as the bleed-proof white here. So, and then of course there's always spraying. So spraying, I don't know, can really kind of increase the level of kind of color depth and saturation within your pieces if you chose to do that. So I don't know, if you don't have spray sealants and whatnot, and if you have some hairspray or something like that, you can always try something like that and see if you like it. And if you like it, and if you think that's something that you're going to want to utilize on all your scenes, maybe look into something like a Krylon or a art workable fixative, or what I'm using is the Krylon UV resistant clear. So anyways, fun stuff. Thanks for watching. Thanks as always for tuning into the channel.